You are walking down a dark hallway. You turn a corner, but it's just another hallway. And another. You are trapped. And somewhere in the dark, you hear heavy footsteps. It's getting closer. You can't breathe. This isn't a nightmare. This is your bank account. Welcome to the Labyrinth. Welcome to the debate. Today, we're examining a framework recently put forward by modern psychologists and sociologists that basically reframes our entire understanding of economic anxiety.
Right, and it's a pretty dark framework.
Oh, it is incredibly dark. They suggest that the ancient Greek myth of Daedalus's labyrinth, the elaborate, inescapable maze, is the ultimate terrifying metaphor for the modern financial system.
Yeah.
We are looking at the debt trap not just as an economic condition, but as an actual psychological prison.
Exactly.
So I will be arguing that the primary terror of living paycheck to paycheck stems from the deliberate, confusing architectural design of this financial system. Like, it is the inescapable structure itself, the literal blueprint of modern finance that destroys the human psyche.
Well, I come at it from a different way. I will be arguing that the true horror does not come from the walls of the maze, but from what lives inside it. I mean, the structure is merely the setting. The active, predatory threat, which is the relentless, flesh-eating reality of compounding interest and collection agencies hunting victims in the dark, that is what transforms a difficult situation into absolute primal terror.
Let's lay out the foundation of this architectural trap, because when we look at the sociological material, the parallels to the myth are, they're chilling.
Mm-hmm.
Daedalus constructed a maze so complex that even he barely escaped it. And today, financial institutions have constructed a labyrinth of equal opacity. From the moment young adults take on student loans or, credit card debt and mortgages, they are thrown into a complex, confusing maze specifically designed to keep them trapped.
I see the structural comparison, sure.
Right, so the terror here is fundamentally environmental. It is the suffocating reality of perpetual claustrophobia.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective. An environment, on its own, doesn't hunt you. The financial system is incredibly complex, yes.
Very.
But a maze without a monster is just a puzzle. It might be frustrating and it might be confusing, but it isn't terrifying. What makes Daedalus's creation a lasting symbol of horror in human history is the Minotaur waiting at its center.
Right, but I don't think you can separate the two so easily. Without the maze, the Minotaur is just a beast in an open field.
Wait, an open field?
Yeah, you can see it, you can calculate its speed and run in opposite direction. It's the walls that make the monster deadly.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. The problem with that analogy is that millions of modern adults aren't standing in an open field analyzing their situation. They are actively fleeing in a state of acute panic.
Because they're in a maze?
Well, you're treating the architecture of finance, like the contracts and the terms of service, as the active agent of terror. But a confusing amortization schedule just sits quietly on a piece of paper. The debt itself, however, is deeply active. Compounding interest is mathematically designed to grow autonomously. It hunts.
Okay, but let's look at how that hunt actually functions. Before we get into the math of compounding interest, we have to address the skepticism of the average listener.
Fair enough.
A perfectly rational person listening right now might say, well, nobody forced you to walk into the maze. Nobody forced you to take out a credit card or sign a loan document.
Exactly. The assumption is that entry is voluntary.
Right. But that is exactly where the psychological trap begins and why the architecture is so insidious. We basically disguise the entrance to the labyrinth as the gateway to the American dream. Society dictates that to secure a middle-class life, you need a college degree.
Mm-hmm.
To get to work, you need a car. To build equity, you need a house. So the modern citizen doesn't wander into the maze by accident. They are directed into it by every societal incentive we have. And once they step inside, the doors lock, and the structural deception begins.
Yeah, the deception is real, but let's break down what is actually causing the panic once that door locks. Let's look at a real-world example instead of just the abstract concept of a loan.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine a 25-year-old who gets hit with a surprise $500 emergency room bill. They don't have the cash, obviously. So they put it on a credit card.
Right.
At that exact moment, the beast wakes up.
And the architecture ensures they can't simply pay it off.
Exactly, but it's the mathematical growth that creates the terror. We need to explain how this hunt works mechanically. That $500 bill goes onto a card with a standard 24% annual percentage rate.
Ouch.
Yeah, if they only make the minimum payment, which is often just a fraction of the interest generated that month, that debt doesn't just sit there, it multiplies. The interest is added to the principal, and the next month they are charged interest on the new, larger amount.
Right, the compounding effect.
Exactly. Human brains are wired to think linearly. We think, I work 40 hours, I earn a set amount of money. But the Minotaur moves exponentially.
But wait, that exponential growth is a feature of the architecture. The credit card company explicitly designs the minimum payment structure to ensure that the debt outpaces the borrower's ability to repay.
I mean, yes, but
Simply said, pay us back the $500 plus a flat fee. There is no compounding terror. The walls of the maze are doing the work.
the rules don't say that because the market relies on exponential growth. I think you're giving too much credit to the static rules and ignoring the actual momentum of the math. Let's trace that $500 ER bill further.
Go ahead.
Eventually, the borrower misses a payment. Suddenly, the penalty APR kicks in. The interest rate jumps from 24% to 29.9%. Late fees are tacked on.
It spirals.
Exactly. A single medical misfortune mathematically transforms into $5,000 of inescapable debt. The beast is accelerating. It is getting faster, while the borrower's paycheck stays exactly the same.
But that acceleration is entirely orchestrated by the shifting walls of the maze. You're proving my point here. Let me give you another example that perfectly illustrates how the structural design is the true source of psychological collapse. Student loans, specifically capitalized interest.
Okay, go ahead. Walk me through it.
So when an 18-year-old signs a student loan agreement, they are entering a structure where the walls physically shift behind them. Let's say they borrow $50,000. They graduate, they can't find the job in their field, and they are granted a forbearance.
Right, a pause on payments.
Exactly. It feels like an exit, or at least a safe room in the maze, right?
A temporary one, yes.
But it's a complete illusion. During that forbearance, the interest continues to accrue. And when the forbearance period ends, that accrued interest doesn't just sit in a separate penalty pile. It is capitalized.
Yeah, it gets absorbed.
Right. It is absorbed into the original principal. So now our borrower doesn't owe $50,000. They owe $60,000. And the next month's interest is calculated on $60,000. The structural terms of the loan literally moved the exit 10 miles further away while the borrower thought they were standing still.
It's brutal.
It is. The realization of that, the realization that the maze is literally rearranging itself to keep you inside, is what breaks the human psyche.
It breaks the psyche, absolutely. But let's look back at the sociological literature we are referencing. Modern psychologists point out that the human nervous system isn't breaking down because people are conceptually confused by the definition of capitalized interest.
Well, what is breaking them down then?
They aren't lying awake at night pondering the legal structure of their master promissory note. They are breaking down because of what happens when the monster catches them.
Which is what, in your view?
Total destitution, eviction, bankruptcy, the inability to feed their children. The fear is biological, it's not intellectual. We are talking about millions of adults sitting in brightly lit office cubicles answering emails while their nervous systems are flooded with cortisol. Their amygdala are reacting to the exact same survival triggers as an early human being stalked by a predator in the dark. Every unrecognized number from a collection agency that lights up on their phone is the sound of heavy footsteps.
I hear you, but the material explicitly describes the primary sociological symptom of modern debt as perpetual claustrophobia.
Right?
Claustrophobia is a spatial anxiety. It is the suffocating feeling of the walls closing in. It isn't just the fear of being eaten. It's the cognitive depletion of navigating a space where every door you open is a brick wall.
But you're separating the space from the threat. If the walls are closing in, it is only terrifying because of what happens when you are finally pinned.
Let me challenge that. The environment itself causes despair long before the final ruin. Think about the modern gig economy.
People are grinding through a primary job, driving for a rideshare app on the weekends, selling their possessions online.
Yeah, the hustle.
They are running through the maze, completely exhausting themselves. And just when they manage to save a tiny buffer, just when they think they found a hallway leading out, inflation spikes, groceries cost 30% more, rent goes up.
The goalposts move.
Exactly. The maze drops a trap door, and they are right back in the dark. The psychological toll of the chase is exhausting, yes? But the profound hopelessness comes from the environment. It is the knowledge that the financial system is structurally inescapable for the majority of the working class.
I'm not denying the environment is bleak. It is. But let's look at the grimmest metric presented in our source material. The researchers note that the average adult works endlessly, with the absolute dread that they are just one missed paycheck away from ruin.
Right, one paycheck.
That phrase, one missed paycheck, is the crucial metric of terror here. It isn't a vague ambient claustrophobia. It is the acute, localized panic of proximity.
Proximity to what, though?
To the teeth of the beast. If you have a 6-month emergency fund, the Minotaur is 6 months away. You can still hear it, but you can breathe.
Sure.
If you are living paycheck to paycheck, the Minotaur is right behind you. You can feel its breath on your neck. The panic escalates proportionally to the proximity of the threat. The walls of the maze don't change whether you have $10 or $10,000 in the bank. The mortgage terms are exactly the same, but the psychological terror is radically different. And that difference is entirely dictated by how close the predator is to catching you.
Okay, that brings us to the most unsettling part of this entire framework. If we accept that the maze is terrifyingly complex and the beast is relentlessly predatory, we have to ask the ultimate question. How did we get here?
Yeah, this is where the myth gets very, very dark.
Exactly. The Minotaur didn't build the maze. Daedalus did, under the orders of King Minos. The tension between my focus on the structural trap and your focus on the active predator forces us to look at the intentionality behind both.
Right.
In the Greek myth, victims didn't just wander into the labyrinth by accident, and they certainly weren't exploring. They were deliberate tributes. They were thrown into the maze.
They were sacrifices. The source material specifically notes that 14 Athenian youths were sent into the labyrinth at regular intervals to feed the monster. They were an appeasement.
And when we map this onto modern hypercapitalism, the implications are chilling. We spend so much time in economic discourse arguing over how to, fix the system. We assume that poverty, subprime lending, and inescapable debt are flaws in the architecture.
Like they're just bugs in the code.
Right. We act as if the engineers of modern finance made a mistake, and if we just tweaked a policy here or there, we could rescue the middle class.
But the framework suggests it isn't a mistake at all.
Exactly. It is functioning exactly as it was designed. If we follow the metaphor to its logical conclusion, the debt trap is a containment system. We are the sacrifices thrown into the modern maze to feed the financial beast.
Man, that is bleak.
Look at the massive profits of the credit card companies. Look at the multi-billion-dollar collection agencies. Look at the institutional investors buying up foreclosed single-family homes. The designers of the system, the modern-day Daedalus, built the maze to harvest the panic of the trapped. The architects are the real terror. They constructed the walls to ensure the beast is always fed.
Okay, I agree that the victims are sacrifices, absolutely. But I completely disagree that the architects are still in control of the horror.
Wait, how can they not be? They write the legislation. They draft the 100-page terms of service.
Because the beast has outgrown the maze. You are attributing a level of omnipotent control to the institutional designers, as if there is a boardroom of bankers perfectly calibrating every individual's suffering.
Well, they're certainly profiting from it.
They are, but the reality of modern finance is that it is largely autonomous. High-frequency algorithmic trading, compounding derivative markets, automated credit scoring. These systems operate at speeds and scales that human beings no longer direct.
But human beings wrote the algorithms. They set the initial conditions.
Setting the initial conditions is not the same as controlling the outcome. King Minos demanded the maze be built to hide the Minotaur, but even he couldn't control the beast.
That's true.
That's the core of the predatory horror. The autonomous market forces, the compounding math, the relentless drive for quarterly growth, They operate independently of whatever structural intentions the bankers started with.
So it's just a runaway train?
Worse, the system requires a constant supply of new victims just to sustain itself. It isn't just a machine built by greedy men, it is an unleashed, self-sustaining organism that must consume to survive.
Even if it is an organism, it still relies on the architecture to feed. The system ensures compliance by keeping the population in a state of perpetual disorientation. You cannot afford to stop running.
Right.
And you cannot afford to question the architecture of the maze, because if you stop analyzing the twisting corridors for even a second, like if you miss that one paycheck, the collection agencies descend. The psychological horror is complete because the maze isolates you. It exhausts your mental resources trying to decipher shifting interest rates and disappearing equity.
And while you are exhausted, the Minotaur provides the constant adrenaline-fueled terror that forces you to keep turning the wheel. You are generating interest payments until you die, basically out of sheer survival panic.
It really forces us to reconsider what we view as normal in our financial lives. We have normalized the state of being trapped.
Yeah, we have.
We have internalized the labyrinth so deeply that we actually blame ourselves when we can't find the exit. We sit at our kitchen tables looking at spreadsheets thinking, if I just budgeted better, if I just understood the terms better, I could escape.
Exactly. We blame ourselves for failing to solve the puzzle, completely ignoring the fact that you cannot budget your way out of a structure that was engineered to consume you.
Right.
We have normalized the state of being hunted. The monster isn't just hungry, the math of its hunger is infinite. And the maze is rigged to ensure you can never run fast enough to escape it.
So, to sort of summarize our positions today in light of this grim discussion, I have argued that the primary psychological terror of modern finance is the architectural trap itself, the suffocating, inescapable walls of complex debt instruments, capitalized interest, and economic policies that create a perpetual claustrophobia.
The realization that the financial system is a psychological prison, specifically designed by its architects to confuse, disorient, and contain the working class.
And I have maintained that the core of the horror is the active predatory pursuit, the modern Minotaur of compounding interest, algorithmic acceleration, and collection agencies that hunts us in the dark.
The realization that debt is an autonomous, exponentially growing beast, and that the acute terror of one missed paycheck is what really breaks the human mind.
Yet we remain sharply divided on the ultimate source of this nightmare. I believe the true terror lies with the designers, the architects, who intentionally built a system of human containment to harvest wealth.
And I believe the architects have lost control. The terrifying truth is that the autonomous forces of the market have become a self-sustaining predator, and no amount of structural redesign can stop the math of compounding hunger.
Looking at modern finance through the lens of ancient psychological horror provides a profound, if profoundly unsettling perspective. It strips away the sterile academic language of economics.
Yeah, the talk of yields, amortization, and fiscal policy.
Right, it strips all that away and exposes the raw human toll of our current reality. There are certainly deeper, darker corners of this modern labyrinth left to explore, but we leave you to sit with the claustrophobic implications of our discussion.
Listen closely. That sound. It isn't your heartbeat. It's the footsteps, and it's right behind you.